to Lisa Marie Kreis, who is going to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Coralie.
Did I miss anything? I don't know.
I think you got it all. Hopefully my microphone and sound is okay. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Stephanie Dobson. She is the sole proprietor of Henka Divorce Law and Mediation. Stephanie is caring, results-focused, and experienced collaborative divorce lawyer and mediator who helps growth mindseted, coachable parents navigate family separation while they connect with and support with their children, empowering them to make a plan to write a new family story based on developing lifelong, peaceful, positive, and thriving relationships. She has welcomed technology into her practice, operating a paperless office and using video conferencing technology to reach families both locally in Lloydminster, as well as families across Canada. As an educator, Stephanie is the founder of Up a Notch Learning, Inc., an e-learning platform to empower separating and divorcing families with a collection of free resources and affordable course content to help families make informed decisions so they can thrive. Stephanie is an active community volunteer and has served on many board of directors, presently being chair of the Alberta Law Foundation, vice chair of the Legal Education Society of Alberta, and chair of our Battleford's Bar Association. And I know Stephanie personally as her children attend our school. So I'm really happy to have you here, Stephanie. Hope I didn't miss anything. I'll pass it over to you. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you to Connecting Parents and Supporting Families for inviting me to talk with you today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a screen share of the presentation. I think, yep, we've got it. And so I just, if you can, I'm just going to bring it up. And if you can just, I'm going to actually, I think this will work if I pin myself. Then you can always see me. If you happen to be on a tablet, you can always see me as the presenter and then the PowerPoint presentation. So can you confirm that you can see the slide that says "for the sake of the kids"? Yes, okay, good. With this screen sharing, I always want to double check what's being shared. So today we have, it's about a half an hour to 40-minute presentation or so. And then we'll have a chance for questions at the end. So without further ado, let's get going. So just for an overview of what we'll be talking about today, first I have a few introductory remarks. Then we'll be talking about the importance of protecting children from parental conflict. Next, how to build resilience in children. Then we'll go over strategies to reduce or prevent conflict. And lastly, what to do when conflict arises. So if any of you saw the Facebook Live that our organizers did last week, they talked about who this presentation is applicable for. So although this was advertised as for divorce, sort of a two-part series on divorce, I want to reiterate that this presentation is not only for separating and divorcing families, but it's also for those who have been separated for some time, and also for those who remain living under one roof, but who may be experiencing conflict. Because today we're talking about the impact of parental conflict and household conflict on children's brain development. All right, so this is just a little introduction of myself. So as Lisa mentioned, my name is Stephanie Dobson, and I'm a practicing collaborative divorce lawyer, family mediator, and online educator. So I thought it would be of interest to share with you a little story about my logo. So if you have a look at the butterfly part of my Henka Divorce logo, oh, looks like someone just needs to mute. What you'll see is that the butterfly is actually dual faceted. So not only is it a butterfly, but you may also see the children's faces in the profile of the wings. So this, to me, reminds us to continue to keep centered on the children as you're going through divorce, raising healthy, thriving children. So in Asian mythology, actually, the butterfly represents good and love. So on my side hustle part, as Lisa mentioned, I'm an online educator. So I have tons of free e-learning resources and affordable course content for families that it just started out as a mission to help my own clients. And then it ended up continuing on to help families globally. And we've got an audience on every continent. So I'm very excited for the growth of Up a Notch Learning. Just a few pictures. In 2006, I came from from Richmond, British Columbia. Oops, what happened there? From Richmond, British Columbia, and I moved to Lloydminster, and I've been here ever since. On the more personal side, I've got a husband, 3 kids, 3 dogs, a gecko, 10 cats, and we live on a farm, and we love to spend time at our lake property in all of our seasons. So we're almost ready to get going here. I just wanted a couple of reminders. As far as the comments, please do use the chat function in Zoom. Unfortunately, with this screen share, it's hard for me to see everything. So I'll have the organizers, if you can keep an eye on the comments, if there's any questions that come up. But the Q&A will be at the end of the presentation. There's quite a bit of time for that. I encourage all of the participants to grab a notepad when you have a moment, or get out the notes function on your phone, because there will be an opportunity for some actionable takeaways from the presentation today. So let's get going. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about families in both one home and in 2. So first, let's start by talking about the divorce side. So decades ago, the research concluded that divorce was something that negatively impacted children. In more recent studies now, it's clear that the fact of divorce itself is not necessarily the qualifier that determines how a child will be impacted. In fact, instead, it's the level of parental conflict that has a huge impact on how the children will adjust to divorce and their level of resilience. So if we know that conflict is the identifier of negative impacts on kids, then for our purpose, it doesn't matter whether parents are separated, divorced, or still living under one roof. The same principles apply. So research shows that children do have an increase in stress following a divorce, but it's not the divorce itself that impacts long-term psychological impacts of children. Children can experience conflict in many different ways. They can witness conflict, or they can even be put in the middle of conflict. So let's have a look further at how conflict impacts children. So I don't know if some of you have heard of the Norleen Foundation. It's a foundation based right here in Alberta, who gathered researchers from around the world, including researchers from Harvard and other elite universities, to study brain development, amongst other things. So their research concludes that toxic stress is what negatively impacts brain development. So let's talk about what that is. So there's 3 types of stress: good stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. So good stress is a type of stress that's controllable. So it's things that we go through that ultimately help us to grow as human beings and to adapt coping skills. Tolerable stress would be things that are bad, but that are unavoidable. So things like realities of life, like death, moving away, or even serious illness. Toxic stress is what we're really trying to avoid here. That's the type of stress that's uncontrollable and unpredictable. And for kids, it's typically associated with not getting the help or support that they need. And that is what can result in an adverse reaction and adverse brain development that has long-lasting effects. Exposure to conflict is a form of stress. It could be good stress, it could be tolerable, or it could be toxic. So we know that divorce is not likely going to fit into the good stress category, but if parental conflict is low, it could cause divorce to fit into the category of tolerable stress. And what we want for kids is to avoid getting into sustained states of toxic stress because of parental conflict. That's divorce or no divorce. Again, we're just talking about parental conflict here. So here's some of the effects of exposure to toxic stress. Now, there's many different effects, but I'm just going to go through a few here. It has the potential to change brain chemistry and brain anatomy, which increases the size of the limbic system, causing PTSD symptoms and shrinking the brain's neurons. It can create health issues, and given that there's a greater likelihood that for developing addictions, emotional dysregulation, inability to concentrate effectively, and other coping mechanisms. A subset of health issues, the immune system can be suppressed. And lastly, gene expression can be affected. So what does that mean? So we're born with certain genes. Scientists have found that it's a convergence, of course, of our genes and our lived experiences, so nurture and nature, that will shape which traits are ultimately expressed. And so exposure to toxic stress can actually affect which genes get expressed from your original DNA. So I'm sure that you would agree that one of our goals as parents is to give children the best opportunity possible to build the strongest, healthiest, and most resilient brains possible. So whatever you can do as parents to reduce the level of conflict in your household, you'll be helping your children. And this can and will help them to build better and more resilient brains. On the flip side, the risk is that if children are exposed to toxic conflict on a prolonged basis, it can permanently alter the brain's architecture. So let's go one step further even and look at our children growing up and becoming parents themselves. So when the brain's architecture is permanently altered, that loss of functioning will stay with them into adulthood. And their ability to parent effectively will depend, of course, on how their brain has developed and the resilience built up from childhood. So it's up to us as parents to shield our children from parental conflict, which again is a form of toxic stress, in order to help our children to have the best opportunity to build resilient brains. All right, so let's change our focus now to resilience. So there's many definitions of resilience and qualities that describe a resilient person. So first, let's talk about that definition. So resilience is defined by Oxford Languages as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness. So next slide, I'm going to bring up a list of many qualities that could be used to describe resilience. So here's where you're going to bring out that notepad. So when you think of building resilience in your children, what does that mean? Here's the list that's going to be coming up rather quickly on the screen of some of the qualities of resilience. So I encourage you to take a moment now. I'm going to pause to allow you to write down the top 5 qualities that you want to help your children build or to maintain. If you don't see it on the list, of course, feel free to write down your own. So just the top 5. You may want to take a screenshot of this, and you can certainly write these things down later or come up with your list if you're having trouble. So take a moment to write down your top 5 qualities that you would like for your children to develop. Of course, they're all important. So once you've got your list, some of you may still be writing down your list. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect as to why these qualities are important to you. And then the ultimate takeaway, the how. So as you're likely taking from this presentation already, shielding children from household or parental conflict could be a how. And this will directly impact how easy or difficult it will be to help your children to build these skills. I'll give you another 20 seconds or so to write down your top 5 resilience qualities that you'd like your children to maintain or to build. All right, feel free to take a screenshot if you haven't written them down yet. You could always do it later as well, of course. All right. So what we're trying to do is to prevent toxic stress. So we know that there will be stress. We hope that most of the stress that our children experience is going to be good or tolerable, but we want to prevent the toxic. Why is that important? So that children will have the ability to bounce back from these experiences. So divorce is one of those experiences that we want children to be able to be resilient from. What kids need in order to bounce back and to be resilient is calm, clear minds. And when they have this, the result is that they'll be able to be resilient and thrive, whether they're living with parents under one roof or the children are living under two roofs. Let's look next at strategies to reduce or prevent conflict. So if we know that parental conflict is a form of toxic stress, and such stress is detrimental to children's ability to be resilient, well-adjusted little kiddos, then we can understand the importance of reducing or preventing their exposure to such conflict. So let's look at those strategies. First, creating a detailed parenting plan. So for those of you who are separating or divorcing, or who have already separated or divorced, when we talk about children growing up in two homes, one of the first things that parents typically need to deal with is creating their parenting plan. What is a parenting plan? It's a guidebook or a rule book for how parents will parent after separation or divorces or divorce. These plans are what parents will negotiate either at the kitchen table or with the help of a divorce professional like a lawyer or mediator, or they may have the court's assistance in imposing a plan if they can't otherwise agree. So the level of conflict between two parents is one factor that will determine how detailed of a parenting plan you will need to create. So you can create a parenting plan that's 1 page or one that's 50 pages. It just depends on what your particular family needs. So the goal of a parenting plan is not only to decide how parents will parent together today, but also how to prevent future conflict. So you want to put into your parenting plan anything that you believe will create future conflict between you and your co-parent. Next, let's talk about planning for disagreements. So disagreements will arise, of course. You can't prevent disagreements, but how you and your co-parent handle them will determine whether the conflict escalates or whether it stays low, and of course, how long it will take to get to resolution. So whether you're parenting from one home or from two, it's important to create an effective parenting plan for resolution to these disagreements so that your communication will be effective and your conflict will remain low. So what I help parents create is guidelines for dispute resolution. Typically, parents can agree that they'll adopt a few basic principles when they're reaching agreements. So for example, acting with honesty, transparency, and candor, demonstrating cooperation, respect, integrity, and dignity, identifying and addressing the needs of all, and finally, focusing on the well-being of children and themselves as parents. So when we apply these principles, I feel that it's important for parents to consider a few things. So here's some examples. What's best for the children? This is something that gets overused, but what it really means is it's not what's best for the parents, it's what's best for those kiddos. Number 2, maintain the integrity of a strong and accessible parental relationship with both parents. Always convey an atmosphere of respect and positive regard for one another, irrespective of your feelings for each other, and mitigate conflict whenever and however possible. The way I see it, it's about fighting together for what's right for the children rather than fighting over parental rights themselves. So it's a shift of mentality when disputes arise. Often we think of divorce, unfortunately, as a bit of a tug of war. But in fact, what we're trying to do, the mentality that I'm trying to help parents to do, to create, is to see that they're going to work together for the sake of what's best for the children. every time there's some kind of a tug of war or a feeling of tug of war, the children will feel it, and they get anxiety and stress that can be so harmful to their brain development and their resilience. Sometimes getting a professional involved to bridge that gap between the parent's viewpoint is what's needed. So when a conflict arises where the parents aren't having any luck resolving it, then the next step may be to involve a divorce professional, such as a mediator or a lawyer. We hope that you don't ever end up having to go to court, but the role of a mediator is someone that can help you to bridge that gap and be neutral. So it helps parents to hear one another and to come up with options so that resolution can be reached. All right, next strategy is learning to communicate effectively. No matter the level of conflict between two parents, effective communication is necessary for any co-parenting relationship, and that goes whether you're in one home or two. So I help families with all different levels of conflict, and even the most high conflict parents find a way to communicate from a distance with lots of guidelines in place to help them to keep that conflict de-escalated. So for families with high conflict where communication is difficult at the best of times, I encourage you to look into Bill Eddy's work. So Bill Eddy is a lawyer, mediator, social worker, and author of many books on helping families experiencing conflict to get to resolution. The communication tool that he's helped develop to help families communicate is called BIF, brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So this method helps anyone in a high conflict situation to structure their messages with a view to de-escalating the situation. He has some great books on some quick tips on how to create BIF responses to any message. As well, in my e-learning portal, I've got lots of free resources on communication. In fact, I even have an interview with Bill Eddy where he describes this BIF method, and that's all free. There's also some ebooks which are available for instant download inside the Up a Notch Learning membership portal. All right, so what do we do when conflict arises? Because we know it's going to happen, whether you're living together or separately. The goal, anytime there's conflict that arises, is to insulate the children as much as possible from experiencing that parental or household conflict. So one way we can do this is to create a space for parents to work out their issues away from children, and for parents to have tools to ensure that the children are actually insulated from the emotions, not even just from the conflict, but from the emotions that come during or after that conflict with the other parent. So here's some ideas. Be firm about picking the timing and communication method for those topics that you know are going to cause conflict, or likely, I suppose, to cause conflict. Generally speaking, it's best to lean towards written communication for more difficult topics. This act of writing down messages can slow down the communication, which can often de-escalate a situation. Be deliberate about when you read messages. So if you know that it's a message that you've received or that you need to send that will cause conflict, if you're on the receiving end, you may want to avoid reading it until you're not actively parenting. You know, we always talk about having that aura that goes around you. And when you're feeling an emotional response, even if you don't say something, the children still are impacted by that energy that surrounds you. Next, avoid responding immediately. So not only are you going to be careful about when you read the message, but once you've read it, it's important really to take an opportunity to absorb the message that so that you don't have a reaction with the emotional side of your brain. Just giving yourself time to cool off can help. And lastly, get help using either a co-parent, coach, or a mediator. Sometimes just having someone there with conflict resolution skills who can assist as disputes arise between the two of you, or as you're in the middle of a conversation and something erupts, that co-parent, coach, or mediator can really help to diffuse the conflict and help you to arrive at resolution, number one, more quickly, and number two, with less conflict. All right, I want to leave you with one final thought about conflict. I believe that kids have so many rights beyond that which legislators and courts suggest, and that's how I work with every one of my clients. Isolina Ricci, in her book Mom's House, Dad's House, has a great list of these rights, and she calls them the Family Bill of Rights. And in fact, I have this right on my wall at the office, and read it daily. So let's go through it. Number 1, each child has the right to have 2 homes where he or she is cherished and given the opportunity to develop normally. Each child has the right to a meaningful, nurturing relationship with each parent. Number 3, each parent and child has the right to call themselves a family, regardless of how the children's time is divided. Number 4, each parent has the responsibility and the right to contribute to the raising of his or her child. Number 5 talks about conflict. Each child has the right to have competent parents and to be free from hearing, observing, or being part of their parents' arguments or problems with one another. And lastly, each parent has the right to his or her own private life and territory, and to raise the children without unreasonable interference from the other parent. All right, well, thank you very much. I know that was a very heavy topic. There's lots of information there, and I certainly welcome any comments, questions, or discussions from the presentation.